Hey everyone, you're here sewing with Cody, and in today's video we're going to talk about the buttonhole foot number 3. So the buttonhole foot number 3 is also known as your manual buttonhole foot. So some may ask, why would you want to use a manual buttonhole foot instead of the automatic buttonhole foot number 3A? So the difference between the two is a manual buttonhole foot is really designed for making buttonholes that are much larger than what the number 3A automatic buttonhole foot is capable of. So that foot is only capable of making a buttonhole that's about 3 centimeters long. So with the number 3 buttonhole foot, you can make a buttonhole whatever length you want. So first we're going to show you how to make a manual buttonhole, and that's one of the purposes for the number 3 foot. Some machines come with this foot, but most of them do not. So here we're on the Bernina 570 Quilted Edition. So let's set it up to make a manual buttonhole. And so what makes this foot different from any of the other feet, and why it's a buttonhole foot, is if you look underneath here, you see these grooves. So those grooves are designed for the satin stitches on each side of the buttonhole when they're being created to ride underneath. So what that does is it really helps move the fabric smoothly underneath the foot without those satin stitches getting caught, but also it helps keep everything nice and straight. Those satin stitches are going to want to ride and stay in those grooves, so it helps keep everything straight for you. So one thing we're going to need to do that's a little different when working with the automatic buttonhole foot is we're going to need to mark on our fabric. You're going to need to draw where you need to start and where you need to stop for your buttonhole size. So you would want to measure out. So here we just measure like a 1.5 inch just for demonstration purposes. Just drew a line, had a start and a stop point, so we know where to start and obviously where to stop, because we have to control all that for each buttonhole. So this is something, if you need to make a series of buttonholes, you would need to do this each and every time on all of your locations where you need to create that buttonhole. So if you're making like shower curtains or something like that, we want like a nice long buttonhole, this is one of the feet you would use. So let's get started. So I've got a 1C foot on, so I'll take that foot off. I'll then put my number 3 foot on, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my buttonhole on the screen, so we'll say number 51, and we'll then want to make sure we tell it that we're working with the number 3. So there he is. So then what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to come to the eye, and we're going to want to do a manual buttonhole. So we're going to scroll up here and we have manual. So here we're almost ready to get started. So there's one more thing I want to do, because I find, especially on the 570, because every machine has slightly different settings, is I like my stitch length to be dropped down a little bit for my buttonholes, because I find the 0.7 is not tight enough. So let's go down to like a 0.6. And just using the stitch length knob to go moving it counterclockwise will drop that down a little bit. So let's get started. So we've got a little notch in our foot right here on the left hand side, and that's basically to help us line up with that first line we have up here that we drew for our buttonhole. So make sure we line that up and keep that straight line lined up with that little finger there. So we want to make sure we're going to start stitching. And the very first thing it's going to do is do a satin stitch down the left hand side. And you want to make sure you stop right on that line. You're going to tap your reverse, and what it's going to do is it's going to stitch up the other side. And the foot really helps keep everything nice and straight because of those grooves underneath. Now when you get to the top, you want to make sure you stop, if anything, 1 stitch shy of that top satin stitch start. So then you're going to tap your reverse again. It's going to bar tack at the top, and it's going to stop. You're going to tap your reverse again, and now it's going to come stitch that satin stitch down the right side. So once you reach very close to the edge or the end of that first satin stitch, I like to stop at least one stitch before the end of that one, and tap the reverse again, and it'll do that bar tack one more time. We'll lock in those stitches, and that's it. So you can cut your thread, and there's your nice, pretty, extra long stitch. Making manual buttonholes are not my favorite. I much prefer the automatic buttonhole foot, but this is one method and one of the purpose of this foot. So there is something else we can do with this foot. So we can take some cording, just like 8-weight cord, and we can make corded buttonholes. So you really would want to match the color of your cord with the color of your thread. So what we'll do is we'll take our cord, always longer than what we need. This is a little too long, and because we have those nice grooves, it's going to slide right in those grooves. So we kind of just take it and just stick it right underneath those grooves. So we can lower the foot, and this is where your knee lift really comes in handy. But with the 570, when we press on the foot pedal, it will just drop that foot for us. So what we're going to do, we can restart our buttonhole, and now we can make corded buttonholes. So of course you would want to match up or basically make a line for the size of your buttonhole, but just for demonstration purposes, I'm just going to show you how the corded buttonhole works. So I always like to hold it up a little bit to keep it in those on each side of those grooves on the front of the foot. It's like we can do a little reverse. So the same method that we used to create our previous buttonhole is what we'll do to create this one. And so a corded buttonhole gives you a more secure buttonhole, especially when it's a very heavily used buttonhole. And of course, like I said, you would want to match the color of your thread with your cord. But what this does, it gives it a little bit more of a raised satin stitch, but it makes it so much more secure. But you can use the same method with the automatic buttonhole foot number 3A. And we'll see that when we get to that 3A buttonhole foot. So at this point, what I would do is I would actually tie this cord, and I would use a needle and pull it to the back. Or you can pull it to the back and tie it on the back, because you don't want to just cut it, and you definitely don't want to leave it. But to make it the cord itself more secure, and of course so it doesn't unravel, you'd want to bring it to the back of your fabric. Something else we can do with the number 3 foot, the manual buttonhole foot, is we can make a fairly simple rolled hem. So instead of going to your overlocker, which makes a stunning rolled hem, we can make like a mock rolled hem with our sewing machine using this foot. It's really neat. So first we've got the foot on, we'll go to stitch number 2, which is our zigzag, and we're going to adjust that zigzag. I found making the stitch width about 3.3 and the stitch length like about 0.6 or 0.7. So we'll kind of drop it quite a bit. So let's say 0.6, meet halfway. And so what we're going to do, so now we've got this set up, we're going to look closer at the foot. So here if we take a closer look at the foot, we have these 3 little teeth, and those have different purposes for what you're doing. But what we're going to do is we are going to take the edge of our fabric, and we're going to line it up just slightly to the right of that center little toe, as we're going to call it. And what's going to happen is when we start stitching, it's going to start rolling the fabric because of the stitch we're working with, and those tunnels that are underneath the foot are going to cause it to ride right in that tunnel and keep everything nice and straight. So let's take a look. So see here how I've got my fabric slightly to the right of that center toe, and what it's doing is it's rolling the fabric and it's feeding through that left tunnel. So we'll stop here and see what we've got. So if we look here, we have a nice, pretty little simple rolled hem. So you could definitely use a thinner fabric, a thinner needle, which is what I have in here. I've got an 80-12, but you could go like 75-11. But you could definitely use a thinner thread. That's what I was going for. A thinner thread, so it may not be as bulky or as thick, but it'll give you that nice, pretty rolled hem. So super simple, especially if something you're not really going to see, something that's quick, something that's simple, instead of going to your serger. And you can play with the settings. You could, especially using the thinner thread, you can decrease that stitch length so the stitch is a little bit tighter. You could increase the stitch width a little bit, but I found those settings work perfectly for this, because you don't want it too big, too wide, because it's not going to want to go through that tunnel very easily. And the key is to have the fabric lined up just to the right of that center toe when working with like the simple rolled hem. There are a multitude of other things we can do with this foot. So let's just say if we wanted to do like a double cord. So here's my little BSR quilt sample from another video. But let's use this La Espiga nylon cord. So it's got some weight to it. And let's stitch it down. So we can, instead of pulling out like a cording foot or anything like that, since a number of people already have this foot, it comes with the machine. And it has so many different purposes. So let's go to stitch 1332 on the 770. This is a very similar stitch that we see on other levels or other models. And we're going to take our La Espiga, and we are going to take it and then take both cords, and put it in those grooves. So we can drop our foot. So our knee lift, or like here, we can just press on the foot pedal. And what's going to happen is this stitch stitches it down nice and easy as the default. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of hold up our cord so it stays on each side of the center toe. So when we're stitching, it keeps them nice and separated. And those grooves in this foot, the cord rides nicely in each little groove. And so you can do some free motion work with it if you wanted to. Okay, let's see. So I reach the edge. So you can see how nice and pretty it keeps everything nice and even, and that stitch holds it down beautifully. So you can really do some fun stuff with this foot. These are just simple ideas just to play with the feet that you've got, especially. There's other things you can do, like some wire edges, some elastic shearing, some gathering over a cord. So you could take a similar cord or a thinner cord, change up the stitch, and do a long kind of basting type stitch with it and use it to help you gather. And a lot of that is all because of these grooves. So having these grooves underneath the foot keep the thread or your cord separated from each other, especially. But instead of moving around the foot or basically moving outside of the foot, it keeps them in place. So that's what's really nice about this foot. It makes it a universal foot for a number of different things. All right, well, that's pretty much it when it comes to the number 3 manual buttonhole foot. So if you enjoyed the video, you learned something new, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and stay tuned for many, many, many more Bernina feet videos. And as always, happy sewing!